A fisherman on the Mediterranean coast, 77 degrees, morning light on the water, net folding over the side of the boat. Cut to 40 miles inland, 6 feet of snow, a skier crossing a white ridge, the same morning light catching the powder behind the board. Same country, same morning. This is Lebanon. You have seen it in the news, the port explosion of August 4th, 2020, the blast wave reaching Cyprus, 149 miles across open water. But this morning is not in any broadcast. Lebanon's beauty is not despite the wars. It is how the Lebanese answer the wars. 15 places, each one a layer you did not know existed. From the ski slopes that open while the coast is still warm, to an underground river no one mapped until 1948, to the oldest continuously operating port on Earth. On a small boat in the south, a hand is pressing something against the hull. A yellow smear spreads across the wood. In the afternoon light, it turns purple. You will understand when we get there. Snow powder breaks under the board. A dry crack, clean, like biting into something cold. The air at this altitude is thinner, brighter, the kind of light that makes shadows sharp. Below the valley, the Mediterranean is still warm. This is Manzar Kfar Debian, the highest point in the Mount Lebanon range at 8,087 feet, 28 miles northeast of Beirut. 1 hour by car. Those 25 miles of ski runs make it the largest ski area in the Middle East. A person can eat breakfast looking out at the sea and be standing in 3 to 6 feet of snow before noon. The mountain does not announce this as a contradiction. It simply is. Higher on the slopes, above 5,000 feet, apple orchards hold through the winter. The same cold that packs the snow also tightens the skin of the pink lady apple. The freeze at night builds the crunch that lowland fruit cannot replicate. The shepherds here do not check weather forecasts. They read the light behind Sanin Peak at dusk. Deep orange with low cloud means snow within 48 hours. No one wrote this down. It moved from father to child the way most useful knowledge moves, without ceremony. Apple production here has dropped by roughly 40% since 2019. Fuel prices, the economic collapse, the cost of running cold storage through a Lebanese winter. The ski season has shortened too, 3 to 4 weeks in recent years, where there were once 2 months. The mountain provides both, and both are becoming harder to count on. The village of Kfar Debian itself has about 2,000 residents, Maronite Christian, whose calendar runs on 2 rhythms, the liturgical and the agricultural. The feast days of saints falling in the same weeks as harvest and first snow. On the 4th of December, Eid el-Berbera, families roast wheat kernels on open pans, an old feast that predates the ski lifts by centuries, still observed on the same slopes where the cable cars now run overhead. In a small lodge at the base of the slope, Kishk arrives in a ceramic bowl. Fermented yogurt, cracked wheat, raw garlic. A winter soup that warms from the inside out. The arak served alongside it is made locally, not labeled, passed between tables the way things are shared when they are made for people. When the light shifts in the afternoon, the snow on the upper ridges goes copper before going dark. The melt from here moves downward through limestone that has been hollowed over millions of years, channels and chambers the surface gives no sign of. One of those chambers, not far from this mountain, drops far enough that the light from outside never reaches the bottom. Before you see the bottom, you hear the water. The sound rises from somewhere deeper than the eye is willing to believe. A low, continuous roar that the walls of the gorge amplify and return, the echo arriving slightly after the source, as if the canyon is confirming what you just heard. Cold air moves upward from the opening against the direction of the sun. Bayatara. The gorge the village of Bala has always called El Khor, the hole in the mountain, which is accurate enough that no further description seemed necessary for several centuries. The name that appears on maps, Three Bridges, came in 1952 when French biospeleologist Henri Coiffet descended far enough to see what was producing the sound. A waterfall 837 feet high, dropping through three natural limestone arches stacked one above the other, each formed by the same karst erosion process that has been working on this Jurassic limestone for roughly 160 million years. The bridges are not a human construction. They are what is left after the rock that surrounded them dissolved. The falls run March through May only. Above the rim, at altitudes between 3,900 and 5,200 feet, 120 apple farmers work the Tannerine Cooperative. Golden Delicious and Granny Smith on limestone soil, the elevation producing cold nights and tight skin, a texture warmer ground cannot replicate. Since 2019, production has dropped roughly 60%, but the cooperative still runs. When the falls reach their loudest point in the middle of March, that is the signal to begin planting seedlings. A phenological calendar written in water and stone that predates any agricultural extension service by several thousand years. In a small restaurant above the gorge, kibbeh bil laban arrives in a shallow bowl. Lamb kibbeh submerged in goat yogurt, denser than the Beirut version, the sourness cutting through the fat. When afternoon light reaches the lowest point of the gorge, it touches the third arch for a few minutes before the shadow takes it back. The limestone does not end at the bottom of the visible drop. It continues downward and outward, hollowed by water moving through it since before this landscape had a name. Somewhere below, that same water has built something else entirely. a system of chambers long enough that it took explorers decades to find where it ended. Step through the entrance and the outside world cuts off. Not gradually, but immediately. The wind stops. The temperature drops to 64 degrees Fahrenheit and will hold there through every season without variation. What remains is the sound of water moving over limestone somewhere in the dark ahead, and the smell of wet stone and air that is cool and clean in a way that outdoor air rarely is. Jeta runs 5.6 miles into the mountain, 11 miles north of Beirut, organized into 2 levels. The upper gallery is accessible on foot. 2,460 feet of lit passage through formations that have been accumulating since before the mountain above them existed. One stalactite hangs 27 feet from the ceiling, the longest recorded stalactite in the world. The lower gallery is accessible only by small boat, moving through a subterranean river that is still actively carving the rock it flows through. The boatmen who navigate the lower gallery work without maps. They read the sound of water striking the cave walls. The pitch and timing of the echo tells them where the passage widens, where it narrows, where the ceiling drops low enough to require a passenger to lean back in the boat. This knowledge was not written down and is not taught formally. It passes between colleagues the way craft knowledge passes, through proximity and repetition. The senior waterman in the bow, the newer one watching from the stern. The river they are navigating is the same river that supplies drinking water to roughly 1 million people living in the valley below. The formation that took millions of years to produce and the infrastructure that supplies a modern city are drawing from the same source, in the same limestone, at the same time. In 2011, Jeta reached the final 28 candidates for the new 7 Wonders of Nature, only Middle Eastern site to do so, which meant that for a period, this cave's name appeared on ballots in countries whose citizens had no particular reason to know Lebanon existed as anything other than a news dateline. When you emerge from the lower gallery back into the upper, the temperature does not change. What changes is the light, the formations visible now instead of implied by the sound of the boat moving past them. Near the exit, a small stand sells carcade, hibiscus tea, $2, the color of dried pomegranate, slightly sour, the kind of drink that makes sense after an hour in the cool dark. The river in the cave is still moving, still cutting. Every century, it removes another layer of limestone that the surface above gives no indication of losing. Above the same mountain range, there are trees that were already old when this cave was first entered by anyone carrying a light. Some of them have been standing for 3,000 years. The bark smells of resin, sweet, faintly warm. The kind of smell that takes a moment to place because nothing in a city produces it. Light comes through the canopy in long shafts, landing on the forest floor in patches that shift as the branches move. The oldest trunks are deeply furrowed, dark reddish-brown, rough in a way that does not feel like ordinary wood. Some of the trees standing here were already old when the word Lebanon first appeared in writing. The Cedars of God in Bashari district 75 miles north of Beirut hold 375 ancient trees in a protected area of 252 acres. The oldest tree is estimated at 3,000 years old, standing when Solomon's temple was still being built from timber taken from this same range, a fact recorded in the Book of Kings and in the memory of the village below. What remains at Bishari survived because, in the middle of the 19th century, the village built a wall around it, one of the earliest organized community conservation efforts on record, predating any national forestry law by decades. The forest that once covered an estimated 500,000 hectares across Lebanon had been reduced to fragments, most of that loss driven by the Ottoman Hejaz Railway's demand for fuel between 1900 and 1908. Hundreds of thousands of trees, gone in less than a decade. The Abi Samra family has maintained the forest across generations, their responsibility beginning with the village council of the 19th century. The keeper walks the grove at dawn before visitors arrive, checking each tree, clearing fallen branches, making notes. He addresses the oldest trees in Arabic, not as prayer, but as courtesy extended to elders. The craftsmen who work wood in the village below use only fallen branches, cuttings and deadfall, nothing taken from a living tree. Cutting a living cedar is both illegal and culturally prohibited, and the distinction matters. The law came later, but the prohibition was already there. At a table in Bashari on a cold morning, a warma arrives alongside bread. Lamb slow-cooked, a winter dish that tastes of altitude and ingenuity in equal measure. Alongside it, cedar honey, dark, resinous, slightly bitter under the sweetness. Some of these trees were already centuries old when the wall went up. The oldest one has been standing through every war this country has had a name for, and through several it did not. When the wind moves through the canopy, the sound it makes is the same sound it has always made, indifferent to the history unfolding at the base of the mountain. Along the coast below, where the limestone cliffs meet the sea, something else has been standing just as long, built not by nature but by the people who looked at this same landscape and decided to hold their ground. A limestone outcrop rises from the river valley like a natural column. Narrow at the top, steep on every face. The kind of geological accident that a military strategist would have ordered if geology took requests. Afternoon light strikes the rock face at an angle that makes it look carved rather than formed. Below, the Nahr al-Jaouz, the Walnut River, moves slowly between the banks. A dry sea wind comes from the Mediterranean, not far off. Mesailha Fort sits at the top of that column, in Batroun district 37 miles north of Beirut. Built in the 17th century by Emir Fakhr al-Din II, on a formation that had been doing the defensive work for millions of years before anyone placed a stone on it. The walls are low and modest because they do not need to be otherwise. No siege equipment of the era could be positioned on a narrow limestone column 98 feet above the river. The fortress was never taken by military force, and the credit belongs more to the rock than to the architecture. Three miles north, Batroun is a small coastal town known for one thing above most others: lemonade, hand-squeezed to order at open counters along the waterfront, sometimes with a splash of orange blossom water, $1 to $2 a glass. The kind of drink that makes sense only in the place it comes from, where the lemons growing in the coastal plain carry more essential oil than imported varieties, which is something you taste before anyone tells you. Batroun's old Phoenician sea wall still runs along part of the waterfront, cut directly from the coastal rock, not assembled from quarried blocks, the oldest municipal infrastructure in the country still doing what it was built to do, keeping the sea out of the town. In the olive press operations inland, the workers still taste the raw pressing each day during harvest season, checking quality by pallet before any measurement is taken. The same verification method used before there were instruments to verify with. At a harborside table in Batroun, Samke hara arrives on a plate, whole fish baked with tahini, lemon, coriander, chili, and pine nuts caught that morning, the kind of lunch that requires nothing else afterward. The Maronite communities in the area say the fort was built to shelter Christians from Ottoman interference. The Sunni account emphasizes that Fakhr al-Din II was a Druze ruler who maintained practical alliances across every religious community. Protection as politics rather than faith. The same fort, two readings, neither wrong. A short distance away, there is a place where the story goes further back than any of these. A river that runs red each spring, and an emperor who tried to silence what it was saying. Every March, water pours from a cave mouth 656 feet up a limestone cliff, and it runs red. Not the red of pollution or silt, but a deep earth red, the color of iron-rich soil dissolved into snowmelt, the result of terra rossa, washing into the mountain's drainage system as the winter pack releases. The chemistry is straightforward. The site is not. Afka sits at 4,117 feet on Mount Lebanon, 44 miles northeast of Beirut. The source of the river, the ancient world called the Adonis. The Nahar Ibrahim today. 22 miles of water running down to the Mediterranean. The red water runs March through May every year, as reliably as the season itself. The Phoenicians who lived along this coast had no concept of iron oxide or soil chemistry. What they had was observation. Every spring, the river ran red. Women along the Phoenician coast weeping publicly each spring, beating their chests, cutting their hair. The Roman Emperor Constantine had the temple at Afka demolished, one of the earliest documented acts of religious site destruction on record, described by the historian Eusebius as targeting a place of what he called licentious rites. The water kept running red after the temple was gone. The village of Afka has between 150 and 300 people, depending on the season. There are no restaurants. Visitors are given cardamom coffee and mamoul, semolina cookies filled with walnuts or dates, made for the major holidays, at no charge, not as a transaction. Each March, according to those who know the place, one man makes the climb to the cave mouth to photograph the first red water of the year. The same man for 20 years. He sends the image to friends in Byblos, who use it to plan their spring hiking trip. No ceremony, no title, no payment, just the continuation of a function that the ancient pilgrimage once served, compressed into a phone photograph and a message. The river does not require anyone to watch it turn red. It does so anyway. The water that runs red in March reaches the sea in April, indifferent to the stories told about it along the way. Below this valley, in a gorge deeper and more sheltered than any spring flood could reach, there are people who have chosen to stay in the rock rather than return from it. Hermits and monks in cliff faces, a different kind of answer to the same mountain. From the rim, the valley drops 3,281 feet, 22 miles of gorge running northeast to southwest. The walls so steep that sections of the floor see direct sunlight for only a few hours each day. Mist hangs in the lower reaches in the morning. On the far wall, at a height that makes size difficult to judge, there are small dark openings, cave mouths, that look from this distance like the holes birds nest in. They are the entrances to monasteries. Kadisha. The name comes from the Aramaic word for holy, the liturgical language the Maronite Church used before Arabic. a language still heard in parts of the Mass today. The valley holds roughly 12 monasteries, some still operating, some reduced to carved recesses in the cliff. Maronite Christians retreated into this gorge across multiple centuries of pressure, Ottoman, Byzantine, earlier. Not because the valley was comfortable, but because the walls were difficult to reach. And difficulty, in this context, was the point. The depth, over 3,000 feet from rim to floor, meant that anyone descending was visible long before they arrived, and those inside knew the terrain in ways visitors could not quickly replicate. The Maronite Patriarchate operated from Der Kanuben, on the valley floor, for nearly 4 centuries, from 1440 to 1823. Because the inaccessibility that made the valley hard to live in also made it hard to control from outside. The valley is not a museum. According to those who have documented it, at least one hermit still lives in the cliff face, in a cave reachable only by rope, a practice continuous from the 5th century. The same tradition of solitary withdrawal into rock that produced the Desert Fathers of Syria and Egypt. At Der Kanuben, the monastery caretaker reads, "Weather from the movement of raptors. When eagles descend below the midpoint of the valley wall by noon, mist will close the gorge by evening, and people on the footpath below should move out before visibility drops." He passes this information to hikers without ceremony, as information rather than as tradition. At a restaurant in Eden, the village above the rim, Fatoush Jabali arrives in a shallow bowl. Wild za'atar, mint, and chicory foraged from the valley floor rather than grown, dressed with pomegranate molasses and mountain olive oil. The bitterness of the hindbee cutting through the fat in a way that cultivated greens cannot replicate. The Maronite community that has maintained this valley held their liturgical language when others lost theirs, held their patriarchate here when the outside world became unsafe, held the practice of solitary retreat from the 5th century to the present. But they held something else as well, something that happened in one of these monasteries more than 400 years ago that an entire empire could not have done and did not do first. The walls of the monastery are the same color as the cliff behind them, not built against the rock but grown from it, the distinction between construction and geology blurring at the seam where the two meet. Narrow windows, deep shadow between the arches, a path that switchbacks up the rock face before arriving at the entrance. Inside, the air is several degrees cooler than the valley below, and quieter. The monastery is dedicated to Antony the Great, a man who lived in Egypt in the 4th century and chose to spend decades alone in a cave in the desert. The Maronite community here adopted him as their patron because the alignment was precise. His cave in Egypt, their cliff face in Lebanon, the same theology of withdrawal expressed in two different landscapes. Kojaya sits at 3,117 feet, 68 miles north of Beirut, one of the oldest operating monasteries in the Qadisha Valley, with between 10 and 15 monks in permanent residence today. Each autumn, the monks press grapes from the terraced vineyard into Hamret al-Dair, available only at the gate shop, not sold beyond. In the afternoon, the light through the courtyard catches a glass of it, at an angle that turns the red almost black. Dinner on the stone tables outside is kibbeh bisayniya, meat and bulgur wheat baked together, brought up by families from Bashari and Aden for the pilgrimage feast, eaten communally without charge or transaction. In this monastery in 1610, the monks printed a book. It was the first book printed in Arabic script anywhere in the Ottoman Empire. The printing press had been installed in 1584, imported from England under Patriarch Sergius Arrezi, a deliberate act of preservation carried out in a cliff face, because a cliff face was where it was safe to carry it out. The book was a psalter, 260 pages, in Syriac Garshuni script. Istanbul, the capital of the empire, with its full institutional resources, did not have an Arabic script printing press until 1727. A surviving copy of the 1610 Psalter is held at the Holy Spirit University of Kaslik outside Beirut. 400 years, and the book is still there. The monastery is still there. The monks still press wine from the same terraces. The path still switches back twice before the entrance. Below this valley, at the edge of the mountains where the land opens into the Bakaya Plain, another community kept something entirely different. Not a book, but a memory. And a city that was already old when they arrived. The Bekaa Valley opens wide here. Flat, dry, the anti-Lebanon range on the eastern horizon, the air at nearly 3,000 feet, carrying none of the coastal moisture. After the harvest, the fields are pale gold and stubble, the wind moving through them without interruption. It is a different Lebanon than the mountain valleys, open where those are enclosed, exposed where those are sheltered. Anjar was built between 705 and 715 CE by Caliph al-Walid I as a planned commercial city at the intersection of the Beirut-Damascus and Homs-Tiberias trade routes. The layout was rectangular, 1,214 feet by 1,017, with 40 towers, a palace, a mosque, shops, and baths, a complete urban plan. Then it was abandoned. For roughly 1,200 years, the city lay under the soil of the Bekaa Plain, its geometry intact but invisible. Anjar is one of only 4 remaining Umayyad planned cities in the world, and the only one in Lebanon. In 1939, French colonial authorities resettled survivors of the Moussa Dagh resistance here. In 1915, roughly 4,000 to 5,000 Armenians from 6 villages had retreated to Moussa Dagh Mountain in what is now Turkey, held off Ottoman forces for 53 days, and were rescued by a French naval squadron that saw a red flag reading "Christians in Distress" from the mountaintop. They did not call themselves refugees. They called themselves Moussa Daghians. Each family in Anjar keeps one object from 1915. A document, a photograph, a piece of cloth, something carried down the mountain and onto the French ships. The object is kept in a wooden box in the house. When an elder dies, the box passes to the eldest child with a spoken explanation of each item. Nothing is written down. The community considers this oral transmission the living proof of their continuity. The story cannot be held by an archive because it was never handed to one. At a restaurant on the main road, a whole trout arrives on the plate minutes after being pulled from the aerated pond in the yard, grilled with garlic, lemon, and coriander, with tabbouleh and flatbread. In Beirut, when people say they are going to Anjar, they mean they are going to eat trout. On the table beside the fish, a hostess opens a cabinet and takes out a wooden box. Inside, a photograph, black and white, the paper thin and soft at the edges. "110 years later, every family in Anjar still knows their story. The box passes, the explanation follows, and the continuity holds. Not because it was recorded, but because someone always remembered to say it out loud before the chance passed. 36 miles to the west, a city holds all of these memories at once. Not in boxes, but in neighborhoods, in buildings, in the particular way its streets were rebuilt after each time they were broken. Late afternoon in the city. The sun at an angle that catches the rooftops, and on those rooftops, hundreds of solar panels, dark blue-black, installed in the last 3 years. The sound of diesel generators, which once ran through every hour of the day, quiets as the stored solar power takes over for the evening. From a cafe below, the smell of coffee grounds rising into the street air. Beirut, capital of Lebanon, 2.2 million people in the greater metro. On August 4, 2020, at 6 in the evening, 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate detonated in Hangar 12 of the port. Material that had been stored there for 6 years without adequate safety measures, confiscated from a ship in 2014 and left. 218 people died. 7,000 were injured. 300,000 lost their homes. The blast was felt in Cyprus, 149 miles away. The energy released was equivalent to roughly 1.1 kilotons of TNT, among the most powerful non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. After the economic collapse of 2019, the Lebanese pound lost more than 90% of its value against the dollar. Diesel for generators became unaffordable. Power cuts ran 20 to 22 hours a day. Within 3 years, more than 200,000 rooftop solar installations appeared across the city, the fastest residential solar adoption in the Middle East, driven not by government program, but by individual households that had no other option. The panels went up on buildings still marked by the blast. In the restaurants of Mar Mikhael, some establishments maintain two price structures: dollars for customers who appear foreign, Lebanese pounds for neighbors. Not deception, but an informal social arrangement that keeps longtime regulars able to eat in the places they have always eaten, while covering the actual cost of operation. This is not written down anywhere. It functions because everyone knows it functions. A mezza arrives, 20 to 30 small dishes at once, hummus and mutabal, and tabbouleh, and kibbeh nayeh, and fateh, the table covered before anyone asks for anything individually. The solar panels on the scarred rooftops are not a symbol that anyone chose to install symbolically. They are a practical response to an infrastructure that failed. But they are also, incidentally, exactly what the thesis of this journey has been. The answer visible on the surface of the wound. 55 miles to the northeast, there are stones that have been asking a question for 2,000 years that engineers still cannot fully answer. Each column stands 62 feet, the height of a 6-story building. And there are 66 of them, arranged in a rectangle that has held its geometry for nearly 2,000 years. The shadow of a column in the early morning stretches the full length of the courtyard. Footsteps between the columns echo in a way that no modern construction replicates. The carved detail on the friezes, after 1,800 years of exposure, is still sharp enough to identify individual leaves. The Temple of Bacchus at Baalbek, 53 miles northeast of Beirut in the Bekaa Valley, at 3,838 feet, is the best-preserved Roman temple in the world. Built around 150 CE under Antoninus Pius, its survival is partially accidental. During the Byzantine period, Christian occupants plastered over the pagan carvings they did not want to see, and in doing so, protected them from the centuries of weathering that damaged everything left exposed. When 19th-century archaeologists removed the plaster, the Roman carving beneath was nearly intact. The same complex holds the trilithon, 3 stones in the foundation wall of the adjacent Temple of Jupiter, each 62 to 67 feet long, each weighing 800 tons. In the quarry 900 meters away, a 4th stone still lies where it was cut. The stone of the pregnant woman, over 1,000 tons, the largest hewn stone on Earth. For 2,000 years, The question of how these stones were moved generated theories ranging from the plausible to the elaborate. The answer that emerged from modern survey is simpler than most of the theories. The quarry sits slightly higher than the temple platform. No vertical lifting was required. An earthen ramp, wooden rollers, and enough manpower could roll 800 tons of stone slightly downhill across 900 meters of flat ground. Gravity did the work that required no special technology. Only the patience to build the ramp, cut the stone precisely, and coordinate the labor. The mystery was a geometry problem, not an engineering impossibility. What the Romans left behind at Baalbek has outlasted the empire that built it, the faith that tried to cover it, and the 2,000 years of people who came to look at it and found they could not fully explain it. Not far from here, below the same valley floor, something far more patient is still being made. In tunnels carved from the same limestone, where the product requires darkness and time and nothing else. Down in the caves, the air settles at 55 degrees Fahrenheit and stays there, the same temperature through every season, the limestone holding it without any mechanical assistance. The smell is old oak and fermenting grape and wet stone, the combination specific to this depth and this rock. Candlelight on the curved walls of the barrels, footsteps that echo just slightly before going quiet. 2,000 years before anyone brought wine into these tunnels, the Romans cut them for other purposes and left behind a naturally climate-controlled storage space that a Jesuit winery would eventually find by following a snake. Chateau Xara was founded in 1857 by Jesuit missionaries who planted Sansol, Carignan, and Grenache in the Bekaa Valley, 32 miles east of Beirut, at 3,281 feet. In 1898, a Jesuit brother walking the property noticed a snake disappearing into a crack in the ground and followed it, discovering a Roman-era cave system 2 kilometers long, with temperature and humidity stable enough to age wine without refrigeration. The caves became the cellar. The winery now produces roughly 3 million bottles a year, making it the largest in Lebanon, drawing on more than 30 grape varieties, including the indigenous Merwa and Obeide, that grow in almost no other place on Earth. The vintners still taste barrel samples by candlelight in the cave. The low, diffuse flame matches the ambient light level underground better than electric bulbs, and the color of the wine reads more accurately without glare. During the Lebanese Civil War, from 1975 to 1990, the winery continued production without interruption, including the years when Zaleh, the nearest city, was under siege. The staff stayed. The harvest continued. The caves aged the wine while the valley above them was a conflict zone. 15 years of war, and not one vintage was skipped. Outside in the courtyard, in the late afternoon, Xara Reserve in a glass, Sansalt and Cabernet, $20 a bottle, with aged goat cheese and warm pita on a stone table. The wine is the color of the valley at dusk, which is not an accident. The glass is empty when the sun finally clears the anti-Lebanon range. In the same valley, not far from here, there is a body of water whose surface stretches wide and flat. A lake that the people who live around it remember was not always there. The lake is flat and still in the morning. Mist sitting low on the water. A dry wind crossing from the anti-Lebanon hills. The reed beds along the shore moving in slow rhythm. When the sun clears the eastern ridge, a flight of ducks lifts from the shallows. The sound of their wings, the only break in the quiet. Lake Karaun covers 23 square miles and is Lebanon's largest lake, but it did not exist before 1965. The Karaun Dam, built between 1959 and 65, flooded the lower Litani Valley and submerged what had been there: villages, agricultural land, ancient sites, the ordinary infrastructure of communities that had lived in that valley for generations. The lake that looks like it has always been here is younger than most of the people who live beside it. The Litani River, 106 miles long, Lebanon's longest, is the only major river in the country that does not cross into another nation. Its water entirely within Lebanese territory, which makes it unusual in a region where most rivers are shared, and therefore disputed. Each year, on the anniversary of the dam's completion, descendants of the submerged villages gather informally at the lake shore. No government ceremony, no media coverage. Just people who know the names of places that no longer appear on any map. Sagbine, Hirbet Kanafar, names passed through families through proximity and repetition, rather than archive. The way most things worth keeping are passed. In the dam's control room, according to those who have worked there, one duty engineer keeps a personal notebook alongside the official log, recording the color of the lake water near the shore each morning. Blue-green when the upstream land is holding. Brown turbid after heavy rain on bare fields. Gray when erosion is moving through the anti-Lebanon watershed. 20 years of daily color entries is a record of upstream land use change that no satellite captures at the same daily granular level. On the table outside, Bekaa tomatoes, grown at nearly 3,000 feet, where the 36-degree Fahrenheit swing between day and night concentrates the sugars in the skin until they taste closer to fruit than vegetable. Bekaa honey alongside. Wildflower, darker and more complex than the coastal version, from hives set among the za'atar and wild mustard fields that border the water. The sun moves higher and the mist burns off the surface. The water that was not here 60 years ago now reflects the same sky that the villages below it looked up at for centuries before the dam was built. To the west, where the mountains drop toward the coast, there is a port that has been looking at the same sea for 9,000 years without interruption. Early morning at the harbor, small boats coming in with the night's catch, the fish still wet in the hold, the fishermen sitting with their nets without urgency. The light is gold on the water, The smell is fresh fish and diesel and salt, in a combination that has no polite name but is unmistakable. This particular morning has been repeated here, in this harbor, for 9,000 years. Byblos, Jabil in Arabic, has been continuously inhabited since roughly 7000 BCE, placing it among the oldest cities in the world where people have lived without interruption. But the detail that most people do not expect is this: the word Bible comes from here. The Phoenicians who lived on this coast traded cedar timber to Egypt and received papyrus in return. The Greeks called papyrus Byblos from the name of this city. Byblos became Biblion, scroll, then book. The most widely read text in human history takes its name from a small harbor town on the Lebanese coast. Seven and a half miles inland from the harbor, at the Hula Quarry, limestone slabs from the late Cretaceous period, 95 to 100 million years old, are split by hand with a chisel along the natural bedding planes. Inside the stone are fish fossils from a sea that no longer exists. Each split is irreversible. The quarrymen read the grain of the stone by feel rather than sight, a knowledge that accumulates only through specimens that did not survive the opening. Each spring, the fishing fleet in the harbor receives a blessing before the first serious expedition of the season. In the Christian quarter, a Maronite or Orthodox priest sprinkles holy water over the boats. In the Muslim quarter, a sheikh recites a dua over the same fleet on the same day. Hummus bil samak alongside, hummus topped with fried fish and pine nuts, a coastal Lebanese combination that rarely appears more than a few miles from the water. The sun is high by the time the harbor empties. 9,000 years of the same morning, repeated with different tools and the same purpose. To the south, there is another port, older in a different way, the city that once sent ships in the other direction into the open Mediterranean, and founded what would become Rome's most dangerous rival. At the beginning of this journey, there was a hand and a shell and a yellow stain turning purple on wood. Now, you know what that was. 3,000 years of chemistry transmitted through touch. No institution teaches it. No archive holds it. No economic reason remains to continue it. And yet it continues. Beauty was never the subject here. Survival was. And survival in Lebanon looks like this: a monastery that kept printing when empires said otherwise, a forest that a village decided to wall off before any law required it, a hand pressing a shell against wood, the way a grandfather showed, the way that grandfather's grandfather showed. The purple is complete on the wood. The fisherman does not look up. The harbor has seen this same motion for 3,000 years. One more morning is enough.